You are welcome to session 5 of this unit. We hope it has been interesting so far. Like we did in the cases of demand, we shall continue our discussion on the concept of supply by focusing our attention on the factors affecting supply or determinants of supply. Determinant of supply. Alright. Do you still remember our Latin phrase? Ceteris paribus. Ceteris. Radius ceteris paribus. What does it mean? All things being equal. Yes, you are right. All things being equal. And I hope you have not forgotten its total. In this session, we shall find out what these ceteris paribus conditions are in the case of supply and affect how they affect supply. By the end of this particular session, we believe that you should be able to mention at least five factors that affect supply and explain the relationship between each of the factors, the five factors we're going to talk about. The relation between the factors and supply. So let's start by talking about the determinants of supply. Now, if you are a producer of a commodity, what are some of the factors that would motivate you to supply more or less of the commodity? You can list them in your jotter. Yes, so let me give you some time to list certain things. What are the factors that will influence you to supply more or less of a commodity? Just be right, just into anything that comes to mind, just write them down. Now, you will notice that the supply of a good will depend upon the on price of the good, prices of all other commodities, prices of your inputs or the inputs, the technical knowledge, the government policy, number of suppliers, and acts of nature. We have already seen how the price of commodity affects supply of the commodity, like we did in the previous slide. And recall the law of supply. The quantity price relationship determines the shape of the supply curve. But the positive of the supply curve within the quantity price space is determined by the other factors. These other factors and how they affect supply is the subject, like I've written here, the subject of our discussion in the subsequent sessions we are going to talk about in this particular session. First thing we are going to talk about is in price increment or price of all other goods. Imagine yourself as a producer for commodity. Say you produce Gary. What would be your reaction when you hear that prices of other goods like maize or rice have gone up without any increase in the price of your good? That is Gary. Now, one likely reaction would be to stop producing the Gary and may shift to the production of maize or rice because you are interested in you are a seller. You want to make money. Prices of maize and rice have increased. People are buying it, so those who are selling are making more money. But you seem to be making less profit. What are you going to do? You may try to shift your production to producing maize or rice because you want to get more profit. So an increase in the price of all other commodities will make the production of the commodity whose price has not risen relatively less profitable, like I've said. So producers will reduce the supply as they shift to the production of relatively more attractive what commodities. As a producer, your interest is to make profit. Yes, your interest is to make profit. So let's now talk about the other thing, that is the prices of inputs. Production actually involves the input of resources and the output of goods and services. What is the price of the things you are using to produce what you are producing? That's what we mean by input of resources. What do you put into your production? Again, let me find out what your reaction as a producer of Gary would be when you hear that the prices of the input you use, say cassava and frying pans, have been increased. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Write your answer down. A rise in the price of a resource input will cause an increase in the cost of making the goods which use that input. That affect the supply of the goods, and that is going to be the case. When you hear that the cassava has been increased, frying pans have been increased, they are also going to increase your price for the gari when you are done producing it, because you don't want to run at a loss. That is what we are talking about. The next thing we'll talk about is technological knowledge. Now, do you remember we made mention in the earlier session that economics is very lively and fascinating subject, and that you would enjoy it most if you can relate the topic to your own life or people in the society. Now, this is the reason why we prefer to ask first for your reaction before we generalize things. When we engage you, we ask you questions. So, write something. Okay, let me ask you another question. What do you think would happen to your supply of gari when you learn that drying your cassava flour for 3 days instead of 1 week would double your production yield? Definitely, you resort to drying for 3 days other than 1 week, and it will be expected that your supply will what increase. So technological improvements reduce cost of production, and thus increase the what supply of goods. For instance, the use of fertilizers and pesticides, improved seed irrigation, and the use of practice constitute a technological change which lowers the cost of production and increase supply of what agricultural products. That is what technological knowledge. Let's talk about government policies. Now, what do we mean by government policies? Do you remember the reaction of drivers and passengers when petrol prices were increased? Do you remember? In fact, many of the drivers reduced their services, and some of the passengers were like, "Oh, instead of me to board a car from this place to this place, I'd rather walk." What would you do as a producer of gari who uses petrol to fuel your gari processing machine? You may either stop or reduce your production of gari. So yeah, we mean that the increase in the price of petrol is an example of the government policy. Like the example of government policy is increase in tax. The government can sometimes increase tax. Remember the government brought something they call the e-levy, and people began to take all their money from mobile money. Government can impose tax, and when that happens, taxes would increase the cost of production, and it will lower the amount of the goods that will be offered or supplied at the old prices. But the subsidy would cause the opposite. So assuming the government is giving a subsidy, it will cause the opposite of what the tax will do. Alright. Let's talk about the number of suppliers. We hope that the many questions that you are being asked are helping you to understand our discussion. Let me ask you another question, still based on our assumption that you are a producer and seller of Gary. What do you think would happen to the supply of Gary when other people also start producing Gary? When maybe assuming now in the old times you were the only person selling the Gary, but now other people have seen that you are making more money, so they want also troop into it, and they want to also sell the Gary, produce and sell Gary. The answer is going to be simple. The supply of Gary, all things being equal, will increase. So there will be more supply of the Gary in the system. If more firms enter an industry, supply will be expected to increase. Maybe when you were the only person supplying it, you could supply maybe 100. How do you measure Gary? 100 bowls or 100 cups or olunka, yeah, 100 olunka of Gary. But when others come and join you, you may realize that there may be like 1,000 olunkas of Gary in this. Alright, so supply would be expected to increase to or at every given price. Conversely, supply would decrease if the firms leave an industry, they may decrease. Let's talk about the art of nature. The art of nature. Art of nature. What do we mean by art of nature? Again, what do you think will happen if flood happens? What do you think will happen to your supply of Gary when, in a particular year, floods, pests, bushfires destroy all cassava farms? What do you think will happen? Definitely, there will be a fall in the supply of Gary. Mm. The change in weather and other natural factors like pests, droughts, floods, fire, etc., affect in particular the supply of agricultural products. That is a fact. So the supply of a commodity is therefore a function of price of that commodity, the price of other related commodities, the price of inputs, prices of inputs, state of technology, government policy, as well as what act of what nature, price of that commodity, price of other related commodities, the prices of the inputs, the state of technology, government policy, as well as what act of nature. All these influence the supply of a commodity. All right. Now, other conditions of supply include changes in objectives of firm. Maybe you may change your objective as an individual or as a firm, and let's say discovery of new or exhaustion of existing raw materials in producing. Recently, we heard that Kantanka has started producing Gary using plantain. You see, so that is new discovery. Now that brings us to the end of this session. In this session, we talked about determinants of supply. We mentioned what prices of other goods. We are doing a quick revision. Prices of other goods. Mention prices of other related goods. Other goods. We made mentions of the prices of your what? Inputs. Prices of inputs. What you put into produce what you produce. We made mention of what technological knowledge. We made mention of the government policy. We made mention of a number of what, and then we ended with what act of nature. That brings us to the end of the session.